Hoping everybody can see my screen. Thanks, John.
We are live streaming now.
Looks like we're still waiting for a couple people, so we'll just. All right, looks like most everybody's coming in. Sorry, just going to give it a couple more minutes. Well, good morning, everybody. I think we'll go ahead and get started. Looks like everybody who's in the waiting room is in the meeting now. So Katie got called away to to the legislature, so is I'm going to be pretty much leading all of this today. So sorry if we're bouncing around. We're do the best we can with making sure everybody gets pulled into the panelists, and so I just ask for a little bit of grace on this, and just please reach out if you feel like you're not getting called on or anything, because I'm trying to juggle between multiple screens here. So basically, I've got the agenda up, and pretty much we're going to be pretty simple meeting this week. I do want to apologize for the materials coming out on Friday. There was some wires crossed, and so anyways, get out late. But the documents are small enough. Most of it I think we can just talk through. Really, it's about 4 pages worth of review materials. So hopefully we can go through it, and if you've had even if you haven't had a chance to kind of look through it on your own. So I'm going to start out with just move everything over into a presentation, but we're going to talk about updated schedule. As Katie's email brought up, pretty much we were on too aggressive of a schedule, and we've had some really good feedback, and decided that we need a little more time to work through some things. And then we'll go into the geology report and the next stage of the fees. I've kind of taken some of your feedback from before and tried to massage that into something that's a little bit more meaningful. So with that, I am going to jump over to my presentation. Okay, sorry about that. I had to switch screens, switch monitors. All right, so this is not, sorry, still technical issues on my end. There we go. No, what is going on? They keep, sorry, it's sharing the wrong presentation. There we go. All right. Sorry about that. All right. So today first thing we're going to be looking at is the rule timeline. So for a reminder, we were going to be taking the rules to the April commission with intent to adopt it in September. We're about a month out from when I would have to have the packet ready and available for the commission. And so it just what we were just weren't internally we weren't going to be able to get through everything, and with some of the great feedback we've had from the RAC and looking at those comments and some of the internal discussions we've had, we really just needed to kind of take a pause, get a little more time to work through some things, allow some more time for our internal coordination and also our legal team review. So what we will be doing is putting out a new schedule to basically go out to adoption at April of 2027, which means we'll be going out to commission in September of this year to ask to open the rules. The nice thing is that spreads out things a little bit more. It gives us a little bit of time to spread out the RAC, but also to have some time on the other end once we go through the public review to do the necessary review and adjustments that we might need to do on that end. And so right now, what we're proposing is to go to a once a month RAC from the every 2 weeks. And I think as you've all kind of noticed, it's been a little bit of a scramble because I've basically been just drafting, trying to get things ready and getting them out to you. And that hasn't always been the most effective or efficient way of doing it, but it was what we needed to do for the timeline. So this should allow a little more breathing room for all of us, allow us to get things to you ahead of time for sufficient review, and allow us some additional time for comments and feedback on those original comments, including allowing me some time to go back and actually edit those and bring anything that's necessary back to the group based on the feedback. So right now we're looking at going through July, and I do have we're going to be publishing one for June 5th as well. The main reason for having kind of these three in a row here that are about 3 weeks spaced apart is toward the end if we need to have some additional time. But the June 5th, if it looks like we're making good time and we've been able to make it through everything, we will probably cancel the June 5th meeting. But yeah, so right now we're going to be putting a hold out on that, and we will get meeting invitations out to everybody on these dates. But that is what looks like what our staff have the availability to accommodate right now. Then, as I said, we'll be doing that through July, doing a final review right up that in August, and then September going to the commission. We'll go out to public comment during October, I'll say through about probably mid-November, trying to get the public comment period done before the holiday season hits. And then that will give us basically December through March as an agency to review those. And if we need to bring, the RAC back together, or we need to have some other, public outreach, we can look at doing that. And then having a final draft by the end of March to be taken to the April commission meeting. So that is what currently we've got framed up. I said it should this have this extra time on the beginning, on the front end and the back end is going to give us a lot more time to just make sure we get the correct set of rules out there. And the big change in that is as we've been going through this, kind of walking through our list of topics on the table of contents here. If you notice, we've got some very substantive pieces still to do. It was not feasible to do that within this next month. But the more we've had feedback on the application requirements, and now that I've got an internal review draft on the permit review standards, it really became clear that we need to move to a different model. Trying to cover all the scenarios of project types we have under kind of one set of review standards ends up becoming fairly problematic in that you have to write each rule to cover that entire breadth of what might come in. Whereas if we go to activity specific, we might be able to say, well, this criteria really doesn't apply to 80, 90% of our projects, but it applies to one project type. And so we can either put that standard on there, or we can say, you can or you can or cannot do something, or it's eligible or ineligible, and that by in and of itself covers that. So that is the approach we're looking at moving toward. And so it's going to take going back and redrafting some of this, but also going and kind of filling in those gaps that we haven't covered yet. So the very conceptual framework for this that I'd love to have feedback from this group on is this is kind of what we're looking at from an activities-based approach. And I just want to say this is a high-level summary. There's obviously a lot more nuance under each of these headings. Some won't have general authorizations, some will have more general authorizations than they do alteration permits, but again, it's all going to be activity specific. But going across the top, kind of, I'll say from least impact to potentially most impact generally, is really trying to figure out how do we accommodate this gradation of project types. And with the new legislation that's come in, giving the preference for non-structural and nature-based erosion control, how do we look at that kind of separately than we do structural erosion control? And so, again, you'll see here kind of in the middle, how do we break those out and incentivize those actions that we want to have come into play and disincentivize those that we don't? So how do we move that needle? And then as you go up and down, the way this is kind of laid out, and today we're going to be talking a little bit about or we'll be going over the concept for the application fees and the permit fees that come in, or the tier fees. But effectively, this top part is going to be the full process. We are still planning on having activity-based forms with eligibility and requirements. That will be what I mentioned previously about having project-specific criteria, so that if you're coming in to do a public access project, you can look at public access rules. If you're coming in to look at, erosion protection, you would look at the erosion protection side of things. And so having things to where they're a little more canned and more easily disseminated. So when somebody asks Tyler a question, he can hand them one set of rules, not, well, go read through 100 pages of rules and figure it out. So it'll be a lot easier for us to apply as well as the applicants to understand. And some of those will have references back to other sections, but generally it'll be where you start looking at the rules. And then those will also include mitigation, just compensation. So basically this is the catch-all category. And then given the way the rules, our new statutory language was provided for the general authorizations, we actually have quite a bit of ability to develop our general authorization program the way we want to. And as we have not brought this to RAC yet, so again, I'd love to have feedback on this. But what the thought is that we would have some broader scope general authorizations that have a higher fee. They still would end up taking department review and verification, validation that they actually meet. Still would have a public review process built into it, just albeit shorter, but it would spell out the sideboards of what could fit into that. So some of these let's just say a public access maintenance and or rebuilding it, something where there's already existing um, infrastructure there. Maybe it can be done with a simpler application form. Again, I don't want to go down the activities that go there because we'll talk through those once we've got them scoped out. But the thought is this would be things that wouldn't require mitigation, but it might have some potential impacts to other agencies or public interests, and we at least want to get that feedback. The step below that would be a narrower scope. We would have a dedicated application, probably more short answer, very specific eligibility criteria with agency verification. So I could see this being things like remedial grading, where we still want to make sure there's a county permit. We still want to make sure that they're meeting their overall permit conditions from previous permits, those type of things. So we can have, but it's going to be spelled out what they can and can't do, and they're going to have to effectively self-verify on that and let us and give us the information on what they're planning to do. And that would have a lower fee because it would be simpler for us to review. And then you'd have what we call the limited scope. This would be something where I could see it might be like access grading by a public agency at a public access point that's less than a couple hundred cubic yards of material, something where it's really not going to be a harm on the ocean shore. It is something that is kind of universally accepted as something that needs to happen. And they would have to validate that they're going to meet the standard conditions and the eligibility criteria. We'd have limited agency review, but it might have something where it's they're working with our field staff, for example, but maybe it's limited review on our program side, but our field staff are involved in it. So again, and this could entail no notice to the agency, or it's an electronic, just a kind of a submission saying, hey, we're planning on doing this. But again, it would be pretty minimal, but important practices that go on and are kind of things that are expected to go on to keep the ocean shore open. So anyways, that's kind of the high level concept. I'd love to get any thoughts that anybody has about this overarching concept. Sorry. If there's any food for thought while we're developing this out further, because like I said, this is very conceptual at this time. Go ahead, Diana.
I just wanted to say that I appreciate you guys breaking this out into different sections. I think that will be a lot more user-friendly and helpful. So I really appreciate this thinking and this approach. And I'm glad that you're taking more time. It seems like the other was really not allowing time to percolate, and there was such a need to keep moving that I feel like this will serve better in the end. Though I really did love the idea of this stuff coming live sooner. So that's the double-edged sword, I guess. So courage to all of you. I know you're working hard, and this is a really heavy lift. So I appreciate what you and the department and your partners are doing.
Thank you. Any other thoughts from the broader group? Because what I'll do with any comments I get today is I'll take those as we refine them, and then get in a couple meetings when we have something to share. We'll definitely look at what this actually means. I'll probably do it similar to what I'm doing with the fee here. Once I actually have something with a little more meat on it, I'll bring that back and we'll refine it further, and then I'll bring future meeting I'll bring back kind of the final version. So all right.
Oh,
Kevin.
Oh yes, Alicia.
No worries. Yeah, no, I just wanted to echo what Diana said, and also yeah, I think it's a good approach, and I think it makes sense, and I think it will also help you to figure out, in terms of capacity, how you gotta to navigate all that. So I think it makes sense also, even from for the department to navigate. And I assume, so I like the way it's organized, and I assume after you'd go more into the details into, because I see it like, for example, alteration permit is like 120-day process. Then the next one is going to be 45-day, I assume, for the other two. Maybe a little trickier to figure out how much day, but I think it will be helpful also for you to refine that. And related to, for the fee, I would say for the last one with limited scope, because it's still taking, time of the agency, I would go maybe with like a minimal fee. I don't know what amount it would be, but it seems like fair that, there'd be a minimal fee for even a limited scope, activity. Yeah. So that's just my feedback. Yeah.
Great.
Kevin, Charlie had a question. He was not
Oh,
promoted yet, but I promoted him, so should
oh,
work.
sorry. Thank you, Charlie. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'll just echo. I think I like the way you've laid this out. There's a little bit more meat for kind of really consideration. I don't really have any comments on the fees, um, except that, I tend to continually think and see that the Ocean Shore team is generally under supported and under capacity. And so I think that we need to be very thoughtful as we set fees moving forward, about the limited staffing, to take on this type of work, particularly during certain seasons, and that we take that into careful consideration and it's reflected in the fee
Hmm.
so that that capacity can be met.
Thank you, Charlie. Yeah, and one thing I would say too that I didn't add about the general authorizations, one of the nice things about adding more things to the general authorizations, especially the routine, is that the application is simpler, the required information is simpler than an alteration permit, and so and I guess I would say, and generally the activities would be more common. And so hopefully by using these strategically, we can actually reduce the amount of staff time on some of these projects, not incentivize more work to come in under those, but more to move some of the things that are time intensive, where maybe our full 120-day review doesn't add a lot to it, or where we can incentivize people to design their project to meet the simpler conditions, or not the more restrictive conditions in order to feed that. So again, it helps move people to the best interest of the ocean shore by providing an incentive, a little bit of the carrot and stick approach. So, but thank you. All right, anybody else? Otherwise, I'm gonna kind of move on because I didn't set a lot of time for going through this. Great. Um,
Oh,
Uh,
Kevin,
Diana's
Diana,
hand.
sorry,
Diana has her hand up.
Diana. Sorry, I don't. Thank you, Laurel. I appreciate that. Go ahead,
Yes,
Diana.
thank you. I'm curious, so what would fall under the 0 to 250 under the general authorization? Can you
So
give,
what
yeah, idea?
Yeah, so that kind of came out. Tyler and I were talking last week, and we've got some current projects, and what I would say is it would be, as I kind of mentioned, maybe small scale access maintenance, we'll call it, where it's needing to move a little bit of sand around to repair a scarp at the bottom of um, at bottom of a trail, and it's working in coordination with our staff. But again, we could have we within it we could define where can sand come from, how you would do it, when you would do it, those kinds of parameters. I think the intent behind that is to find some of these small things, but not just say, well, because it's small, it gets a general authorization. Because I'll bring up like another one I think would be a good one is removing driftwood from a beach access point and putting it back on the beach, right? Something like that, where it's instead of it being easier for you to take it out of that and then dispose of it, driftwood actually has a value on the ocean shore. So taking that and bringing it back onto the beach, those kinds of things I could see fitting into this. We haven't really gone through and looked at kind of what that breadth of activities is. But right now, I think that would be the intent is some of these where they're public agencies, direct ocean shore benefits, that kind of thing.
Okay, thank you.
Kevin, just one more comment, like on those
Yeah.
sorts of general authorizations. I think there's often, if I'm not mistaken, um, some of those activities happen without a permit, or they're unbeknownst. And
Hmm.
so figuring out how some of those repetitive activities can be incentivized to go through the process, is as much as we're considering the fees and otherwise. And I appreciate that y'all kind of have that minimal no fee up to 250, or whatever that number becomes. But thinking about how do we incentivize things that we're missing right now, which is kind of a tricky thing, but maybe the uh, certain notice at certain times of year about certain activities or a schedule of activities that may be routine for a local jurisdiction or a homeowner group. Um, Finding ways that we can incentivize their participation in the program itself, in the permit process itself, so that there's not surprises. And I think that's actually what costs the agency time, are the surprises. So I harped on fees before, making sure that we're reflecting capacity, but I'm also just going the opposite direction here, particularly for those sort of routine things that it's like, well, how do we incentivize that and thinking about
Hmm.
what that looks like?
No, and that's a great point, Charlie. And I know we've talked about this as a group, but part of why we're even looking at things like where do like the general authorizations, where does remedial grading fit within in those? 2 years ago, we weren't getting anybody applying for remedial grading permits, or if we were, it was very few. With some work of our staff going out and kind of monitoring these areas and working with the local jurisdictions, and we found out there was 60 to 80 of them potentially in any given year that were going on without our knowledge. And so you're absolutely right. It's that how do we identify these and create a way to bring them in and at least have a way of if you decide that you have kind of the hard way to go through the process, or if you can meet these conditions and they're laid out up front, this is the easier way to do it. And if you don't get a permit, then there is compliance and enforcement that goes along with it. And so, yeah, it's that how do you, like you said, incentivize that the behavior that we want to see, understanding some of these activities are going to go on with or without us, and without us just ends up leading to a lot of problems, whether it's in more work at the other end, because it's either enforcement action or it's kind of mud on everybody's face because like we don't want to do an enforcement action for something that was good and they didn't want to be in trouble for something that they thought was good. And so yeah, it's just it could help us clean up a lot of messes that are out there. So thank you,
Yeah,
Charlie, for bringing that up.
and I think some of that is actually programmatic and not in the rule.
Hmm.
So routine contact and outreach and
Yep.
education. I would think about the agency's capacity to do that or not do
Yeah.
that. And where you might want support from other types of
Hmm.
groups that may be,
Yeah.
because just because they know now, 10 years from now, you have a whole new group of people, right? And
Hmm.
so over time, that's just kind of what I've
Yeah.
seen. There's stronger compliance often based on education. Um,
Absolutely. And that is why we've brought on a dedicated compliant staff person as well. But the outreach and education is part of it. The issue we've been having is when you only have a one size fits all process and you have these small things and you go, well, we want you to be in compliance. Now go through this 120-day process with large fees and complications in a big form. It's like, well, it's easier to just do it and hope you don't catch me. So yeah, that this will hopefully start bringing people into where we have the education, and then it's like, yeah, see, here's an easy way to fit in the door. Um, so all right, well, good. Well, let's move on to the geologic site report. So with the geologic site report, so this will be incorporated as one of the application requirements as kind of a supplemental document. And part of why we're trying to pull it that way is that what we're seeing today is that the geologic site report's being used to do too many things. And the applications are quite frankly getting really complicated because they'll put very little information in the application and then just say, well, see the geologic report. Well, you have to almost infer from reading through versus it being a statement in the application that says, here's what our answer to this question is. Here's where you can find the support to that answer. And that's really what the geologic report should be, is the support for that answer. And so trying to make that as the document it's supposed to be and not part of the application other than it's a supporting documentation. The other piece that went into developing this is I've gone through and looked at the couple of DLCD's documents, the coastal erosion overlay and the beach and dune overlay. Both of those have geologic site report requirements in them. And so what the exercise I went through with this was to go through those documents and really take everything out of them. Also looking at previous efforts that the state, DLCD, WGAMI, and OPRD have taken on to kind of put the criteria together and the recommendations from the 1994 program evaluation. And so I've kind of taken all of those and thrown them together. Luckily, a lot of the information that's in the coastal erosion overlay and beach and dune overlay address a lot of those previous recommendations and previous efforts. The unfortunate part is many of the local jurisdictions haven't fully adopted those, but those are the part of the model code. So what I wanted to do is, instead of us creating our own unique criteria that I'll say then became the basis of a difference between us and a county or us and a city that ends up adopting by those languages, I wanted to try to create something that was compatible with those criteria. And so what you'll see as we go through this section, or the rule section here, is basically I tried to stay more broad in this for our rule. And the intent behind that is we can then use the forms and the guidance to describe what we mean. Because by having the rule broad enough, when we say something like, and I'm going to jump down to 5 here a little bit, where there is a detailed geologic and physiological description, right? Well, what does that mean? Well, what I've got in this box down here, you can see all the yellow, that's the language that is in the coastal erosion, the beach and dune overlays, right? And so having that, well, we can bring, as an example, we can bring this text that's adjacent to this yellow over into our forms, over into our guidance, and that becomes much more specific of kind of what we're looking for. But as far as the rule goes, we're really coming down and just saying we need this description, right? And so that is the intent. So that is one thing you will notice as you read through this, is that it will seem like it's lacking in some of the detail. What I'm looking for input on today is the structure of this sufficient to capture what needs to be in there? Is the structure of this within the scope of what a geologist should be working on? Because that is one of the comments we've had before as we've been having some dialogues with the geologists, that we have to work within their license, and that we also want to support that by not asking questions that are outside of any of the licensing requirements as well. And then the kind of the third part of that is, does it clearly define the content, the format, the information that needs to be in there in a way that makes sense? And so it's really kind of looking at that broader piece, because we can then, as we get into the forms and guidance and application instructions, application itself, we can spell this stuff out a lot more clearly and have that supporting information. So hopefully that makes sense. Any questions on that before we go through the rule sections? Okay. Then scope and purpose. Does anybody have any thoughts on scope and purpose? And I'm going to pause just a little bit because I know not all of you have had a chance to read through these. Okay. Number two, then, purpose of the geologic site report. This actually, some of the language in here came from Washington, and then I also borrowed some language from the Board of Geology, um, and so kind of trying to pull it together so that we have this um, common understanding, because I think that's been one of the pieces that we've had some disagreements on in the past, where, like I said, I've got some geologists that have basically told us that that is the application form, and that's all the application material. And really, again, as I said before, the intent is to support what's in the application, and it's to support the engineering design of that. It's not a standalone, this is my application, because I did a report. And so really just trying to have that clear so that my Tyler and I successors, as well as anybody new that comes in as a geologist, we can have this discussion and understand where that's at. So, any thoughts on the purpose of the report?
Hey, Kevin, can I suggest something?
Yes.
Because yeah, I'm one of those people where I didn't have time to read it. Maybe to be helpful, like just because I've seen the document is pretty short, if you can
Hmm.
even read out loud each
Yeah.
section so
I
we
can
can follow
I
through, and
can
I think might be
also,
helpful.
you know what?
Because
We'll just do
I
it.
have the document, so it's good, but everyone
Yeah.
is reading at different pace,
Yeah.
and I know
There you
sometimes
go.
you want to give clarification, but I was thinking, yeah, you can even read
I
it out loud,
I
and
say,
yeah,
and I can even do it this way too, so we know right where we're at. So we're in.
perfect. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Felicia. That's actually very helpful.
Kevin, what's WAC?
Oh, that's
Washington.
Washington's shoreline um, program,
Okay.
which is yeah.
So under the WAC one, I would actually, it says current and future geologic and related processes. I would actually probably modify that slightly.
Okay.
I would say current and future geological and climate related processes. I think you need to bring in climate there.
I concur. That was my flag on this one.
And sorry, you said geological and climatology.
And climate related processes.
Okay. Sorry, I was okay. No, appreciate that.
Because then that addresses, basically all things related to ENSO, changes in wave climate, storminess, sea
Hmm.
level, things like that. And the B section is what you have currently, is that correct?
No, there is kind of a statement like that in ours, which is for shoreline protection, it has to be by a geologist that has site-specific erosion. So it kind of has that, but it's not as specific. No, this actually came from the statute. I stole the language or the background language from the Board of Geologists statute language.
Got
I
it.
forget which
Okay.
one that is, but yeah, I think it's for the engineering geologist, I believe is where that came out of. The practice of engineering geology. I think that's where I grabbed that one from. I believe that's that site. And then I took the language on the bottom of B from the beach and dune because, again, they're not always used. The same term is not always used out there.
Yeah.
Kevin, I just had a quick follow-up. I agree with what Jonathan said about bringing in climate. I think um, the interpretation of that might get politicized potentially across different individuals, and so maybe being a little more specific, and at least because he mentioned several of these things, but at least mention chronic and um, episodic or acute impacts related to climate. So
And I think
you can have the more sea level rise type things, and then you have, southern oscillation events.
Mhm. Yeah, and I'm not sure if that would go up here. I do have that down in the report requirements, I believe.
Okay.
When we get down the report content, I believe it has uh yeah, like acute and chronic coastal. But yeah, and again, some of this terminology may need to change, but again, I use some of this straight out of the beach and dune. So I know I have acute and chronic in here looking at that. But yeah, I may need to add climactic in as well, just because it is definitely a figure. But yeah, yeah, and see, like down here, I have sea level rise, chronic and episodic events. So again, I think it's in here. It just may not be in that top one. Because again, this upper one is really to get that broader, right? What is this a report for, which is the
Yeah,
um
gotcha. This is a constant challenge for me in reading these rules. We're constantly reading the not the details, but the description thereof up front.
If you wanted to, you could generalize, you could put in parentheses under current and future geologic and related processes, you could put in parentheses and just call out a few items. I mean, the big ones are changes in sediment budgets, which can be, of course, both natural and human induced. And then you
mhm.
can also call out, changes in storm frequency, or sea level type changes. And so those three categories, keep it somewhat general
Mhm.
without going into the details of what's then called out later on down below, which I think, what's provided down below, provides the added context to some of these more general classifications.
Okay, well that definitely makes sense. Okay. Any other thoughts on the purpose, A or B?
I think they're good, Kevin.
Okay, we'll come back, and we can always come back if as we get down lower, you see something. It's easy enough to scroll back up. Okay, when a report's required, basically for this one, we've found that our current rule is way too limiting in that it says only for erosion. It's like structural erosion over 50 foot in length. There's a lot of other times where we've needed it. So basically, what we're the kind of the approach we're taking is to say they're required unless we don't require it. And the fact the way that would then be peeled out is as we build into that activity specific, so that actually allows us to have this geo report requirement a little bit the rules smaller. And then when we get to those specific projects, then we would ask for more or less information. And I guess I'll give an example of that is you put in a hardened concrete public access site, you could create local hydraulic and scour erosion issues. We're currently not having any of that, requiring any of that to be looked at. And so we want to be able to ask it for those questions on those but then there's a difference between doing some, I'll say, dune grading versus a 300-foot long structural full gray, you know, boulder revetment. And so we want to be able to, through that kind of matrix that I shared earlier about the project specific, to be able to call that type of information out, because dune grading versus a structural shoreline protection versus an access point, we're going to need a little different information and depth of information on each of those. And so we want to be able to call some of that stuff out. John, go ahead.
Yeah, just a comment. So I mean, I think what you have there is fine. My one sort of question mark would be that, and I think we've touched on this before, is there anywhere where there is a document containing a matrix of all the different types of potential, let's say, remediation, shore protection work, etc., where there's, just a simple matrix that maybe expands on what you have here. So for a proposed riprap structure, here's kind of a series of requirements that are broken down in simple form, but in a matrix. So at a glance, you can kind of get a sense of what the level of work is required to actually produce something like that.
Yeah, and so that is actually one of the thoughts that I would have as part of the application guidance.
Good. Yeah.
Because
Okay.
and I'm sharing this slide that I shared with you guys before, as far as like, these are all those little technical questions, but being able to come in, because again, some of these things, even within this description, right? It's everybody probably needs to provide this, but do you have to have all of these included for every project? Maybe on some of these it would apply to everything, but others it wouldn't. But in the example of this would be in that matrix, right? And we could potentially have, I'm going to call it a G report A through F, and we then refer to that in the application of, here's what it looks like, and we've got maybe a checkbox, next to each one of these requirements. And so, hey, if you're if you're in an F, that would be, we're going to ask you for everything. Whereas if you're in an A, we only need, these three, those two, and these other four questions to be answered. And, that's all you would have to apply. And so that's kind of the thought right now. And that, I will say, is kind of the new way of thinking once we move toward the activity based as being the central part of the rules. Is that part of the issue was, and why I have a lot of those criteria already called out, is we were thinking, well, if we're applying it to all, we're going to have a rule that specifies all these individual things. And it was like 17 pages of 18 pages of rule versus 2. And so again, and it doesn't translate real well, because like you said, how do you clearly identify what we need? And so what the hope is, and John, this is where all looking at this next year plus, is to, once we get the activity spelled out, is to then start putting together that matrix and talk with you, and probably bring it back to others, and just have that discussion of like, okay, what are the things that are critical for these? What are the things that are nice to have? And what are the things that just absolutely are meaningless for some of these projects?
Sounds good, Kevin.
Great. But I appreciate that feedback, because that is the intent, and I didn't mention that earlier. Okay. Qualified to prepare the report. Oh, go ahead, Rhiannon.
Oh no, I was going to talk about number 4. So if you want to give an intro first,
gotcha. So basically, this and John, I appreciate some of the language you've given in the past on this. So I'm trying to get it basically down to, again, meet with what the beach and dune and the coastal erosion or overlay language go in, but also to be really specifying that, given the complexities we have along the coast, is we need to have professionals that are not only engineering geologists, but also have that demonstrated experience in education, just because those two things go together so essentially. And part of that is also making sure that we're able to at least ask some of the questions and hopefully encourage the professionals that are working with this to pursue that, kind of professional development related to coastal processes, those types of things, so that we're all working off the same kind of direction and understanding the latest science that's out there and going from there. And so that's part of where this comes into play, is really just trying to lay that out, that you know just because you have that engineering geology, you can operate as a geologist, that's great, but we need to have somebody that's providing us information that also understands the coast. And John, you probably can better explain that as well, but Rhiannon, go ahead. Let you start off.
Yeah, I was just looking through our coastal hazards overlay zone, and as you probably noted, it also included registered civil engineers, which the beaches and dunes overlay zone didn't for whatever reason. I wasn't around when those were were both created. But I was just thinking, I brought it up because I know a lot of different jurisdictions have either broader or more narrow definitions for who they consider eligible to do these geotech reports, and so I don't know if it would be beneficial to include it or just have some clause in there that says like or equivalent kind of a thing, so that
Mm-hmm.
it's
Well,
not so prescriptive that other jurisdictions like conflict with it.
yeah, and that is interesting. I think and John, I appreciate you jumping in here too, but I think part of it is under the engineering, that would be that to have the same skill set, it would be a geotechnical engineer. And that is because the OSBIELS actually defines that, and that's the OAR that I've referenced here, is they define who the professional geotechnical engineer. But to have what we say the intent of this is to look at the geological and engineering principles, that I believe it would have to be the geotechnical engineer or the engineering geologist.
So I believe that to Rhiannon's point, that some communities, and I'm thinking Lincoln County, recognizes engineering reports for who have some background in geotechnical work, but they're certified engineers, as being eligible to provide geotechnical
Okay.
expertise. So Rhiannon's right. There are some nuances here that
Okay.
one needs to be mindful of. My biggest problem with geotechnical engineering on the Oregon coast today is that almost 99% of those individuals have limited to no experience in coastal processes or coastal engineering, and that's the overriding issue. And how one changes that is not easy, because ultimately that's all overseen by the board of geologists.
Mm-hmm.
And right now the board of geologists, as far as I understood it, don't allow for training in specific
Mm-hmm.
disciplines, beyond just getting your registered geologist or certified engineering geologist certification. So those are sort of the two, one of the biggest issues that I think you face right now.
Yeah, and I think, and John, that's where I'd appreciate your input on this too, and making sure that we have it. If anything you can do to help me kind of massage the language, I do want to run it by the board of geologists as well at some point, but I also want to make sure it's helping kind of
Yeah.
steer that direction, because as I think you and I've talked about before, it's like, what can we do to encourage the expertise to develop on the coastal area, and again, without requiring and saying that we're going to make up some certification that we have no legal authority to do, but at the same time, we also need to make sure that the information we're being given is actually applicable to the dynamic um, area we're working under. So that's the thing. And so
Yep. Agree.
so yeah, I'd love to have any feedback along the way as we refine this, and any thoughts you have.
Well,
Um,
I think you said it before. I mean, the most important group that needs to actually be sort of responding to this is the board of geologists. I mean,
mhm,
they're the ones that ultimately make these decisions, and so having them review this is going to be critical. But I think calling out training and coastal process and engineering. It's coastal engineering. I think those are all important for practicing on the coast. I'm wondering how much pushback you'll get on this one.
Okay.
But I think it's good to go high and then respond later.
Yeah. All right, John O'Leary, go for it.
Non-technical answer because I'm not a geologist. I don't have the background. But as a planner, I can tell you that Lincoln County's code, to John Allen's point, it's kind of a mixed bag. But when it comes to specifically the coastal erosion issues, our code actually does require it to be a report prepared by a geologist or a certified engineering geologist, and it's not the same throughout Lincoln County. Some of the cities are different, so it is a mixed bag. But in our case, I can tell you that I've had situations where just a geologist in conjunction with a civil engineer have tried to prepare a report for coastal erosion analysis when it comes to the shorefront development permits. So this would be upland. We're not talking about riprap. We're just talking about they're building a house up on a bluff somewhere, and it's pretty stark. You can read a report from a civil engineering or engineering geologist versus a report from a geologist who's trying to work with a civil engineer, and you can see the difference. And it's experience. It's how much time have you been doing this? How much experience do you have? Who have you learned from? That kind of thing. And so civil engineers trying to work with a geologist will give you one kind of product, but certified engineering geologists in my experience, will give you another. And it's just much easier on our side to just get the certified engineering geologist report and work from there, because they know what they're trying to accomplish with the foundation design for these structures. And so they're highlighting the parts of the geology in the report that really are relevant to their design. But I'm not a geologist, so I'm looking for specific information about the hazards, and I'm looking for specific answers to that, to those hazards, and how are you proposing to safeguard your development from these hazards in the long run. And that's, just because I'm looking for something specific doesn't mean I necessarily know what I'm missing. So there is that component of it. And then the other thing is having a person peer review that work. I think having that option available to you is critical. And then what you have in there is what I would recommend. I think the way you have it structured, it seems a little vague the way it's written, but I would leave it like that. You want that latitude to decide when you need somebody to come in, take a look at a report, and tell OPRD staff, is this what we're looking for? Is this the information that's most relevant to this particular site? That kind of feedback. But yeah, in our case, I would say just a professional geotechnical engineer can't produce the kind of report that we need for what we issue in terms of development permits for these upland developments. I couldn't tell you if that's necessarily the case for OPRD, but just from my experience, if I were in your position, I think I would first and foremost want to see a report from an engineering geologist, but maybe just a geologist, because you're not building a house, you're putting in a revetment, and maybe you don't need an engineering geologist. I don't actually know. Anyway, I don't know how helpful that feedback is, but that's kind of what I have. So.
Well, and I appreciate that John, because part of where this came from too is having the dialogue that I did, oh gosh, almost 2 years ago now, with the geology board, and the discussion about like, where does the role of a geologist versus an engineer start and end? Because I know we've had a lot of misconceptions, I'll say, at least that we get presented to us by landowners, And the term engineering geologist, some of them are like, well, my engineer has done this. And it's like, well, they're, that's not, then they're thinking that the way they're presenting is like, that this is actually my engineer. And getting that feedback from the engineering geologist or from the geologist board about that, the role is to support and provide those recommendations that are then used with it to engineer and design the project. And that's where I think we've taken that recommendation. Think generally, kind of going back to your point, I will say similar to this, we'll be requiring an engineering design on, especially I'll say more structural type of things. Some of the smaller stuff we probably won't, but basically it's that we're going to be looking at having an engineer engaged, because part of that is we have a safety criteria as well, and I I'm having to sign off, or Tyler's having to sign off that these projects meet these safety obligations. Well, that's within the realm primarily of an engineer, and their licensure and their insurance covers those things, right? And so that's where trying to tie those back into that, and what qualifies as works versus a structure. And that's a whole different thing that I don't want to get engaged in, but trying to support those roles and protect us as well as the public by having that. So I just kind of wanted to frame that up, that we probably will be having that engagement with an engineer on most of these projects as well. And I think that's going to lead to better projects, honestly, and better protection for the landowners in a lot of these, especially these bigger investments. All right, Jackie.
Hello. You kind of just touched on what I was going to say, but in response to John's comment, having for some of these like a combined licensure requirement of on a more robust project, having a geotechnical engineer and a engineering geologist would be helpful, and maybe defining that in the section could be just trying to make that more clear if that's what you're getting at, because I think some of these analyses as well would require a geotechnical engineer versus a geologist for the more structural ones. So that was my comment.
Thank you. That's good to hear from a practitioner saying that same thing, because that's been, say, when I first started in some of the projects that came through, and you're like, yeah, these are the questions you ask. But yeah, especially when they get bigger and more complicated, I think you're absolutely right. There's some specialties. So I will look at whether that would go here, or whether that would go into additional, like more of the project specific requirements, because I think that may be where we clarify because what I'm thinking on some of those project specific rules is we might have some that specifically say, hey, no geology report required for this, and others might say, like, again, I'm just going to say, you want to build a monstrosity of a revetment that is in a sensitive area, you're going to need the top level of expertise on all of these for us to be able to say, yes, it's good. So that having that sliding scale like we were talking about might be a good thing to have in those project specific too, than trying to clutter this up. But I will definitely look at how to include that. So appreciate it. Diana?
I was just going to speak in support of looking for the input on a coastal engineer as well. And I wish Megan or Peter were here today, because Megan has brought that up a couple times, that she hopes that somehow we're wrapping in that expertise. And as I was reading this, that's what I kept thinking, like, will there be a separate section that's like what's required in a coastal engineer's report, or some way to bring that expertise and knowledge to this conversation. I know in Washington, a lot of the practices have both, so they would have a geotech and engineering geologist and a coastal, and they would be putting that report together as a group. And if we just have this, then again, we're still leaving out this whole, part that needs to be considered. So I was wondering if you guys see that as an additional report that's needed, or
Mhm.
are you going to try to section out some of the things that has been dumped into the geology report? You know,
Mhm.
and of course, I have no I have no advice on how that should be handled, other than I hope that we do ask Peter and Megan and people who would know best.
And that's a really interesting way. I mean, I was looking at this, I mean, the way we've kind of handled it and the way the Board of Geologists has the geologic report standards already identified and established, kind of what does the report look like? So I was looking at that model, but I think what you say makes sense in that ultimately we want to get the information and the assurance that these things have been looked at, they've been considered, and the design has taken them into account, right? That's really what we're looking at. And if it's coastal a coastal engineer that has that depth of background with a geologist, that may be okay. And so I'll try to figure out how does that connect. Because I was looking at it more of having a professional engineer and having an engineering geologist or geotech engaged, then you bring those two, the engineering and the geology together. But yeah, I hadn't really thought about the coastal engineering side of it, even though that is a really very niche um, expertise, and there's not a lot of bandwidth out there. But again, it's how do we move in that direction? So definitely something to think about. But I'm not sure how to get to that. But maybe it's in the application requirements where it's with since these are all reports that go along, and then the application is the ask, right? And then everything else is what supports it. Maybe there's a way to roll that in, like as long as this information gets brought in. And backed up with substantive and qualified reports, then we can accept it. So we'll take a look at that.
Well,
Yeah, I just want to reinforce the view that I mean, there are very, few coastal
Hmm.
practitioners in Oregon, period.
Yep.
Coastal engineers. It is a very niche area, and it's really orientated towards large scale engineering design in the coastal zone. And I think you're going to have to think carefully about what applications might actually warrant something like that,
Hmm.
because that's a whole level of new
Hmm.
uh, evaluation that an individual or individuals may have to go through. And it
Yeah.
starts to get very, very expensive fast. And I question whether the relevant data is actually even in the landscape to, be able to
Hmm.
drive some of the modeling that would actually be needed in some of these cases. So I think you have to think very carefully about that.
Okay.
and I would say that, of course, we don't have the expertise because it's never been required. And once it becomes required, then those individuals will find jobs in Oregon because it will be necessary. And those are through conversations about how it occurred in Washington with Washington practitioners. And Washington practitioners look at the geologic reports that I've seen in Cannon Beach, and they're aghast at the generalized information that's provided, and really don't understand why there is not more rigor and consideration for what is happening so I believe that this is a market situation, and once it becomes required, then our local practitioners will bring that expertise on, or in whatever way is necessary. If it's there's nothing stopping them from uh, bringing somebody on on a one project basis, or however that needs to happen. But again, I understand I'm not the person to address this best. I'm just asking that we do check in with Megan and Peter and people who understand and have said in these meetings that they want to make sure that this expertise is included in this review process and these applications.
Great. Thank you. Charlie.
Yeah, I agree with Diana a little bit here, and I understand the comments before about the niche, um, and the lack of maybe data that's there. I do think that's the direction we want to go. And so to Diana's point, if we're not moving in that direction, then we're not actually creating the space for the science and the expertise to inform future projects. So while I do feel like we have limitations there, and we don't have something like a cohort here in Oregon, I do believe that we ought to be looking to and thinking about how do we bring in that type of um, niche science, if you will, because I do think it's highly pertinent to the future of this type of work. And again, like the direction we want to go.
Sorry, just making a couple notes here. Okay. Any other thoughts on who's qualified? All right. So the report content, let's see, time check here. Yeah, we're doing okay. I'm going to plan to take a break here in about 10 minutes. So with the report content, as I said before, this is set to be kind of set that higher level framework. One of those is to build it in consistent with the Board of Geologists uh, standards, which they've got published, and then also look at tying it back to also providing the information we need, because that is one of the things we have struggled with. Is we've had geologists that have basically said, well, this is what the geology board says I have to have, and this is the minimum, and this is in that format. But when we look at it, it's like, yeah, but it doesn't give us the information we need, and the information we need is still compatible with that format. So what I've actually done with these topics down below is even the introduction language is kind of set up to not mirror explicitly, but it is compatible with the format that the Board of Geologists has put out there. And so really trying to tie that back in is that really the intent behind this is to get a report in that format that gives us the information we need to make a decision, right? And not and kind of, I'll say, build out the loophole of, well, you didn't explicitly ask for it, so you can't ask for it, which we is an argument we've had in the past. And so that's, again, trying to be much cleaner on this type of stuff, so that whether it's, Tyler or me or somebody else, or Jackie, if it's you or somebody else in the future, we're all looking at this from the same perspective, right? So these, what I'm going to do is, these each have specific language in them, and they've got a title. The way I've kind of formatted each of these is a title, and then I think Charlie, I think it was you that brought up, or John, I don't remember who it was, brought up kind of having the italics. This last half of each of these is kind of supposed to serve as that italics, right? So it's really trying to get at that list of, these are the most common things that are within that. And what that list is based on is those, that existing language that I say are referenced, by taking a lot of the keywords out of that, so that when we go to creating guidance, it won't be viewed as us creating new rule, because what we'll be doing is explaining this. We're already asking for this. What we're going to just be doing is explaining what we mean by this, and more interpretation of it, versus it being so broad that it's seen, or so just not even including it, that it's seen as us making new rules when we create the guidance. So with that, this first one here is pretty straightforward. It's really, hey, what is that this site and the history of that site? What's gone on there? How has it been developed? What's happening there? What is, what are the site conditions like? What's causing the problems? Really looking at that historical perspective. Jackie, go ahead.
Yeah, I know that you said at the beginning of this that you're trying to keep things a little vague and they could be referenced somewhere else. Is there somewhere that we define surrounding area?
No, that would be the intent would be for in the guidance, unless you have some specific recommendation. Because I think it's gonna, what I would say to that is it would change based on the project type. Again, if you have I'll just say a small concrete stairway that you're putting in, and what could be the side of that versus you're putting in 1,000 foot long revetment, that surrounding area is going to be different within those, right? So how do you scale that without kind of saying, hey, based on that? And so I think that's the kind of the complexities to that I don't know that a brief one would cover that. But if you have any thoughts, I would love to make it more clear. And as I said, I'm
Yeah.
using the existing language that's already in published DLCD documents to build this. Now, it might not be exactly that language because, as I said before, I've kind of had to rework and put it in, but the substance from it's in there. And I want to make sure I'm consistent, but I could definitely make a comment on that and look at it if you have any suggestions.
Yeah, I'd have to think on that without
Okay.
listing out kind of scale of project and scale of surrounding area.
Absolutely.
I think again, Kevin, some of this could actually come out in your guidelines as you develop a matrix around some of these different elements to provide, guidance there.
Thank you, John. I'm going to be perfect. Rhiannon.
Yeah, just looking through our model language, it does look like you have everything pretty much in there, just maybe in a different order, but that's fine. But we also don't have a definition in there for surrounding area, just the surrounding area. One thing that I did note in the kind of first section of this, though, where it's saying that it shall follow the guidelines, we have at a minimum shall follow those provisions in the guidelines, so that might be a helpful thing to add.
Oops, hold on a second. I'm gonna need to adjust something here real quick so I can grab that second comment because that was up a different section.
Yeah, sorry, jumping around.
No, thank you for catching that. I definitely lose some of those things through various edits. Okay. Any other thoughts on A? Okay, we'll move on to B. Jackie, go ahead.
Just one wording change. I think instead of physiological, do you mean physiographic?
Probably. I don't know. Rhiannon, do you have your language open? Can you see what's in there?
Yeah, let me take a look real quick.
Thank you.
Okay. We have sorry, since it's in a different kind of order, I'm taking a look.
At least I have the references for you, but yeah, no, it's all in a different order.
Yeah. I can keep taking a look and I can shoot you a message if I find it.
I just think in the context of this, physiographic makes more sense, but if it needs to follow the other wording there too.
No, I appreciate that, and that we can always update our language as we move along too, though. Charlie.
Well, just on that language, I actually think it's a good point and interpretation. And I mean, physiological would include biological processes and uses thereof in the ecosystem, whereas a physiographic may not. So it might be important to distinguish whether or not we care about one and not the other, or whether or not we care about both.
And we actually don't have it at all in our beaches and dunes guide.
Okay, it may have been in one of our internal, it's just to connect those broader terms too. That may have been an editorial piece. So,
And just so I understand it, Kevin, I mean, the physiological side of it has come up in past reviews. I mean, ODFW
mhm,
frequently weighs in on this particular topic, and I think that was
mhm,
kind of one of the purposes about, gross impacts of structures affecting both the geologic side of things, but also the biological.
mhm.
100%. That's exactly what I'm kind
Yeah,
of.
Yeah, and
I've
so I
heard.
agree with Charlie.
Yeah, that's a fair point. I was thinking more about the body when you say physiological, but it applies to other things as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think ODF and W's review team would be good to inform on that, but I do feel like that is generally um, an underwhelming part of the review,
mhm,
which could be very important if it's, depending on what types of activities the beach is utilized for, and also what types of biological processes are important there.
yeah. And I would say, I mean, in addition to ODFW, I mean, that's also part of our review standards. I mean, we have the natural resource and the scenic qualities in that too. So that may be where the physiological came from. Like I said, I don't remember why the word choice at this time. I've done enough edits. This one eludes me, but no, I'm tending to agree with Charlie and Jonathan as we're having this discussion. But I can definitely still take a look at that.
So just kind of to add on, if you're talking about evaluation of the natural habitat, you're going to want to include somebody in your list of qualified professionals to cover that as well,
Hmm.
because now you're getting into biology and
Hmm.
et cetera. So
Well, and that actually, that's a good question, John, because and Jackie, this is probably more for you and Jonathan Allen. Would physiological be outside the realm of the geologist review, or would that need to be the physiographic side? And then we do within our reports um, do also have the portion for I'm just going to call it very broadly the natural resource assessments, which would definitely get into the physiological side of that. But I guess I want to just make sure that since this is the geo report side of it, is I don't want to have something in here that we get to a point where it's like, well, I can't speak to those things because of it, even though the intent is, yes, we also want to understand what the impacts of this, or what the changes could be to that could then affect those things, right? So that's kind of what we're looking at in that broader scale. So Jackie, go ahead.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. In the application that's usually addressed in the narrative. I don't know if you want to include like a different professional to address those things, whether it's an environmental engineer or a biologist. I don't know if we have the expertise to speak to impacts of like on fish and other wildlife.
Charlie, I saw your hand up there first. Just
I'm
love.
Yeah, I'm gonna wait.
Okay.
Listen.
Felicia?
Oh, I was just gonna say also the term physiological might not even be the right one you want to use because I just double checked, my definition online, but it's like really like the way a living organism or bodily part functions. So it might not
Okay.
even want to be the term you want to use in the first place. So if you want to, mention something that is related to the biology or like habitat function or ecology, I mean, I think physiological might not even be the right word to put there anyways. So just as a note, I don't know.
Kevin, maybe you meant physiographic instead of in the context of
Yeah.
that, and then the biological is separate from that.
Yeah.
It's probably just a
Like I said,
typo.
yeah, I don't even remember. Like I said, but yeah, this is great conversation. It's definitely an edit we'll make. So, but thank you, Felicia, for pointing that one out too, because um, okay. Diana.
Just real quick, in my experience with applications in Cannon Beach, the geotechs will say that they are not comfortable answering those type of questions. An example is, they would say in the report they're going to push the sand out at a certain depth, and our code doesn't allow more than like an inch and a half because Fish and Wildlife did a report saying that any higher than that, it kills the clams. And so, in my experience, limited though it is, they will beg off on those sorts of questions, saying that it's beyond their sphere. So I think it's a fair question of if we are asking for this kind of information, which we should be, that we find out who is best to provide it and include that in the rules.
Yeah, and like I said, and that's already in the application requirements. I just didn't have this ready when we looked at the application requirements, and I know that was a few weeks back. So, but great, thank you, Diana. Charlie.
Yeah, I agree with Diana. And what's been said here too. I actually did the same thing that Felicia did. I looked up physiological. I was like, is this the right word to use? It may not be the right word. I do feel like, and I don't know, is there somebody from ODF&W on the call?
I think Nancy, yeah, Nancy's on.
I do feel like it has been, and I see this every time there's a new habitat lead at Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife and the permits land on their desk. That what we're saying is that this should be included. Who the proper individual is for evaluating and providing some comment on that may not be the geological engineer. But this is a common problem in a lot of development practices. I saw this in wave energy, and you see this often is this conflict between the engineering and the biology ecosystem functions. And so figuring out how those two pieces are married, I think is pretty important, particularly as it comes down to like permit review and informing the permit itself. So where that belongs in the rule space and whether a lot of it belongs in this section, I don't know. What I am trying to point out though is that this does feel like it's been lost oftentimes in past review. And I've heard several times from ODF&W, they felt like they didn't quite have the opportunity. And I think that, you know, that changes every time there's a new person who comes into that office and is like, how deep should I go on this and providing information? Or it's just going to be ignored and it doesn't matter.
Well, and I appreciate that, Charlie, because I think I would take that from, I'm just going to reflect back when I first started. Our rules right now only mention having an assessment done by the geologist, and that's it. And then yes, we have our review criteria that relate to fish habitats and or I should say generally wildlife habitats and impacts, but we have no specific requirements built around those, which when we get to the application requirement stuff, we'll talk more about that. But yeah, it needs to definitely needs to be kind of re-emphasized that these are equal discussions, right? Not just, well, my geologist said it's okay, so it must be okay, or same thing, my biologist said it isn't, so it must not be okay. It's like it is a marriage between these discussions of what is the right project and how do you get the least impact alternative that protects, I'll say all interests when these are being looked at, but preserves the ocean shore in the end. So, all right. Okay, so let's go ahead and why don't we're at
Nancy's hands up.
Oh, Nancy, there we go.
So yes, we do want biological natural resource impacts addressed, but we do not want to be the ones who are providing that to the applicant. So keep that in mind. It's Scott Marion is the lead who will be responding to descriptions, accurate descriptions provided by the applicant or their consultants. So
yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, and the intent was not for that. The intent, Nancy, is to try to have the criteria that then the biologists report on, and so that way we can have that assessment. So thank you so much. And that ODFW can do the review side of it, not the evaluation side of it. So all right. Well, since it is 11 o'clock, want to go ahead and we'll pause at B there. Can we take let's take a 10-minute, come back at 11:10. I'm just going to leave the meeting running here. And unless everybody wants to just power through and have an early lunch, I can do that too. So I'll take how about if anybody how do I want to run this? If you feel like you don't want to take a break, go ahead and raise your hand. Otherwise, I'm getting a note on the other side. Let's take 5. How about a 5-minute?
Yeah, I was going to
Anybody?
say a little break would be
All right.
nice, even if it's
Let's
5 minutes. Yeah.
let's come back at 11:05. We're halfway through this, and then I do want to talk about the fees for the last half hour. So, all right. See you back at 11:05. All right, hopefully everybody with us. Go ahead and we'll get started looking at C here. Um, so basically C is pretty self-explanatory. This is one section, the black text is what we currently reports in our current rules. That is kind of the substantive piece that we had. So again, it's the site specific, but again, trying to tie it back into the broader context of what's going on. So any thoughts on C? No thoughts on C? Hopefully you guys can hear me.
Yes,
We
I
can
can
hear
hear
you,
you.
Kevin.
Good. I just wanted to make sure I wasn't talking into a blank sphere. Um, that's a good thought, Tyler. Everybody just give me a show of hands if you're back. Just hit your looks like pretty much everybody's back. So, all right, we'll keep going. I think so. Oh, Charlie, go for it.
Sorry, I left my hand up too long.
All right. You're, oh, I see what you're saying. All right. Anybody else have thoughts on C before I move on to D? Okay. Then let's jump down to D here. Now, D was put in, this is not in the LCD language. This was put in specifically to try to tie to strengthen and tie the geology report back to being an integral part of the design consideration. And really trying to have that recommendation be based on not just, I'll say, throwing out other alternatives, but actually in being part of that design iteration and discussions of how do we get to the least impact alternative, especially as it relates to geology. And so that is what this was trying to get at. Too many times we've seen kind of this, what at least appears to be a landowner wants this specific alternative, and that's how I'm going to write my report is for that specific alternative versus looking at this broader level of what is best for everybody, the ocean shore, the landowner, short term and long term, kind of looking at that. So I would love to get thoughts from on D. Cameron.
Yeah, there we go. When I read this, I just, based on my limited experience with with reports for shoreline alterations, at least the level of expertise that we currently have available to us, or that landowners have available to them to do these reports. And I don't know if this is the right way to approach it, but especially the last things that you asked for there, chronic and episodic events, sea level rise, vertical land movement, tsunamis, other expected changes, those require a lot of expertise in fields that your average geotech or even coastal geologist probably isn't really going to be familiar with. And I would guess that we're going to get a lot of, kind of basic boilerplate. And from reports in the future, if this is put in there, is that okay? We can't really expect these professionals to have expertise in some of these really complex long-term matters. And I just wonder if there's any way to avoid that, or if we should just expect that and that's okay, or should those things which are probably not going to get taken into account in any serious way most of the time be taken out? I just wanted to raise the question there.
Go ahead, Charlie.
I'm an advocate for keeping them in. I can't imagine why, if we're not getting what we want now, why we would just take it out of the rule. In fact, I think that's more reason for us to pause on making sure we get this right. I don't disagree that there's limited, but I do believe that this is exactly what I was trying to raise on that first point, which it's the level of specificity and information that we want informing permits, and that we shouldn't just say just because somebody doesn't have it that we don't need it, or that in the past somebody hasn't been able to produce it. So I'm a big proponent of keeping it in there. Um, and agree, we do have some challenges with how people approach that, but there's a lot in here that can be challenged based on the individual and how they're reading it and how they're approaching it. But I don't want to get rid of climate change because people aren't good at talking about it.
Touche. I agree with you, Charlie. I just was wondering if there's any way to approach the fact that we're going to certainly get some kind of basic boilerplate, which is not going to be very helpful in a lot of cases.
And I guess Cameron, I would say that's I think where some of this guidance will need to come along as well. And I mean, we do have some language because we've been seeing a lot of boilerplate currently. And that's one of the reasons why in the rules we're talking about like it needs to be, basically backed with I forget the term, but effectively substantive evidence. But we have a term there because it's like you have to be able to quantify it. It can't just be some of these very nonchalant, like we've seen some of our reports that have come in with things like seismic hazards and like, yep, we have earthquakes. Okay.
Right.
That's like, well, how is this site, is this going to make it more susceptible to a tsunami in the future by doing what you're proposing, or is it going to, make it less susceptible? I mean, I'll just say those more, how can we put that in our guidance as well, right? Is how do we get that to be the point so that when we get a report that just says, yep, we have earthquakes, we can push back and say, look, that doesn't give us what we need to actually evaluate the impact of this project on the ocean shore. So, because even if we push back a little bit on that, that's going to make those boilerplates start changing over time, right? And there may be times where people just don't know, but that's where they need to come in and say, the data isn't here to make this determination. Here's what here's what we've put together for this site, and whatever that means, and that's between the geologist, the engineer, whoever's making those statements. But that becomes then at least there's that background on here's what we've looked at, here's what we found, but there's a lot of unanswered questions and we just can't do it, so here's what we're going to give you as a response, right? So at least that's more meaningful than the boilerplate. Jonathan.
I guess, I mean, I'm fine with keeping all of these in here, just recognizing that there will be a lot of boilerplate. There's a lot of uncertainty in some of these elements. And so, you all as the ones who are going to be reviewing these need to recognize that not all the answers are going to be out there. We have generated masses of information that would address different elements of this to some degree. Mm-hmm. It's just the question of how much information do you really want? And so that goes to, whether there's actually information available. For example, sea level rise. There's tremendous amount of uncertainty still out there about the impacts of sea level rise. We use it in our hazard mapping that we provide. And so a geotech could actually utilize those hazard maps and make some estimate of projected erosion, based on what we've generated. Mm-hmm. As long as you are accepting of that type of approach and information, I think it's okay to keep this all in here.
Yeah, and
tsunamis,
and John,
tsunamis, there's a lot of uncertainty there.
Yep.
I would push back on dune grading personally when it comes to tsunamis, because as soon as you start doing dune grading, you change the potential for inundation. Seaside is the best example of where this could actually apply. Mm-hmm. And I brought this up with the city of Seaside. Mm-hmm. The dunes there have grown significantly in the last decade and a half. And if you were to grade those down to where they were in 2010, you'll change the inundation zone for both distant and local. It comes down to how you are going to make these decisions.
And I think, and John, I think that's where the guidance is going to come in on this too, because I think you brought up a very good point there with, with the dunes, but I'm even looking at these broader things is right now, we had a report I'll use Seaside. It was one of their preliminary reports that effectively said, we're not considering sea level rise, any of this stuff, because, for the lifespan of whatever we're doing right now, it won't matter. But it's like, but you're changing the conditions that will be different as sea level rise comes into play. And it's that, how do we get it past that, just kicking it out of we don't need to saying, like what you just said, hey, by grading it, it will change based on what available data is there. I mean, I think that's the bigger part, is just pulling some of those things out versus just kind of the boilerplate of, we don't look at it because we don't know, so therefore it must be okay. It's like, but that's, so you're putting that assessment on us. Well, again, if that assessment comes back on us, we probably need to take the more conservative approach and say, well, realistically, that's going to cause a problem. So we're just going to say no, because you couldn't show that it wouldn't cause a problem, right? I mean, that's kind of that becomes the issue where these things need to be at least substantively discussed. But yeah, I think that's also where this matrix goes, because like you said, some of the things it's going to matter on, some of the things it's not. So some of these smaller projects, this question really doesn't necessarily, maybe a couple elements of it matter.
Yeah, and it's all going to come down to scale and
Yep.
so on, site specific and things like that. I think even things like the cumulative impacts. I mean, those are important questions, but we don't have the answers to those now.
Mm-hmm.
We really don't. I mean, the only example that we have of an area that has been extensively modified with engineering is the Siletz, Salishan, Gleading Beach area, and to some degree maybe down in the Newport area, down by Yarharts and so on. But we don't have knowledge of cumulative impacts. We just don't have the research. And I actually question whether we, other than in one or two areas, where we could truly answer these types of questions. I mean, you might be able to get at it from a modeling standpoint. I'm not convinced.
Mm-hmm.
So again, it just goes back to expectations with some of these, what it is you're looking for and so on. But I think it's important to keep them in. I think it's important to have people thinking about these issues.
And I think that's the nice thing about this approach, is by not having it fully defined in rule, it's going to give us that flexibility on the other end to adjust that. Because I mean, let's just say we start, we're working with you, John, as we develop this, and then we get a couple applications, and it's like, wow, this is just, we were shooting for the moon, and really we should have just, created a glider, right? And the glider would work, then we can adjust that. And that's what's nice about the guidance side of it, is we can change that much more readily than the rules. And so I think that is, I appreciate your last comment there, if it's important to keep it in there. So, all right, John O'Leary.
Yeah, I think everybody kind of hit on what I would point at, and kind of to John Allen's point, and Cameron's and Charlie's, I guess. You're asking questions that I don't think anybody's necessarily going to have some questions that nobody will have the answer to. And then the other thing is do you have on some of these questions, is there going to be a threshold where everybody's going to have to take a step back and ask some more questions about, well, maybe we should actually be evaluating alternatives to, shoreline protective structure, or whatever the application's for. So it's on the staff side, when you receive when you receive this report and you open it up and you're getting, responses to these criteria. If these responses basically indicate, okay, this is the wrong proposed development for this report, how do you respond to that as staff? Because it's usually those thresholds you're trying to establish prior to implementing these rules, where you're taking this report in and all of a sudden it says, well, actually this thing will not stop a tsunami. Well, I know we all know that is that the riprap structure is not going to stop a tsunami, but what was your threshold there? What will this thing do if a tsunami occurs? Is it going to make it worse? Is that possible? Can anybody even measure that? Tsunami is an easy one for me, because I know nobody has any answers to any of that. But I don't know about the rest of it. And like the cumulative impacts one, that one, I have to admit, I would see people, my own applicants, if I asked them a question like that, I could see the frustration just welling up during the conversation. They would just be very ramped up pretty fast. But I also agree with Charlie. It doesn't mean you shouldn't ask the questions. I mean, I don't know how you package the questions up and what you do with the information you receive, you know, during that application process. But those are my thoughts. And like I said, everybody else just kind of hit everything plus the stuff I didn't think of. So yeah, there you go.
All right, Rhiannon.
Yeah, I have a couple things. To Jonathan's point, there is, of course, a whole bunch of data that would be really useful for this, but not everybody is going to know where to find that. So in the guidance, that would be a great place to include some resources to where to find those data sources and give them an idea of like, that's the level of detail that you want. The other thing is that scale and level of detail, I think, is important because you might not get tax lot level information from that data, but if it's regional or if it's, for that cell, then is that good enough? Like, kind of where is your level of detail that you need for that level of detail or of data? And then I think also some of these are more quantitative and some are a little more qualitative. Like for the cumulative impacts, if you can't have like explicit data supporting that, could you have kind of more of a narrative of like, this is a thought exercise so that it's showing that they're not just saying we want this, we don't care what else happens once it's in place, but like put a little effort into using the data that is existing to make some sort of conclusion about what the cumulative impacts or long-term impacts would be.
Thank you. Those are great comments. Okay. I'm going to bump down to E here in the matter of interest of time. This last piece is, I'm going to call it kind of a summary, is really the best, but it's the outcome of what's up there. And I don't remember where this came from. This has come from several different dialogues I've had. And Jonathan, I think it might have been something that we talked about. So again, if language here is wrong, I'm very interested in moving it around. But effectively, it's if the proposed project were to go through, what are the expected changes that can happen from it, right? And looking at that type of stuff and really pulling that out instead of this being more of a checkbox. It's like, this is the piece that effectively is what would kind of go to the alternatives discussion and our permit decision discussion of like, what is it going to change, right? And is it a nothing or everything is going to change, right? So that was what this was trying to kind of get at. Charlie.
Yeah, I'm not sure if accessibility is the word you mean there or access. I think one implies something different. You may want them both.
Let's see.
But accessibility generally is
Yeah.
that would I think imply other things potentially.
Yeah. No, I agree with you. That is. Okay. Any other thoughts?
I guess, Kevin, just going back to the earlier discussion about physiological. So there's discussions here about habitats and ecology.
Mm-hmm.
Again, a geologist or an engineering geologist or a coastal engineer is not going to respond to that. That's someone else's area of expertise.
Yes. Good point. Okay. All right. Well.
And then my last comment is just relating to change analysis, broadly going back to what Rhiannon and I were talking about with respect to scale. Again, it's going to be very scale specific. And so just
Yeah.
recognizing
Yeah.
those types of issues. Some of this information is not readily available, or again is not going to be obvious, like accessibility to and along the beach, or access to the beach at various tidal stages in front of engineering structures, which is I think is what this is really trying to get at. There is data out there. There's a lot of caveats to those data, so you've got to be careful with how one interpret those. But again, yeah, I think it's good to have this sort of broad topic in here.
Great. Charlie.
Is there a need to include like public safety in here?
Yeah, I guess I would go, it's kind of the same comment as ecological, natural, that type of stuff, as it might be outside, but that's a question for Jonathan and Jackie as far as public safety. I know that the engineering licensing includes kind of that safety certification. I don't know. I know that the geology has like kind of the best practices in that, but I didn't know if that would be something that could be signed off on within a geology report.
Yeah,
Jackie or John.
Yeah, that would take someone else. The nature of such though, I would think there might be, but I defer to
No,
Jackie.
I like the idea because it is one of our review standards, but I'm just wondering, it might be that needs to be in an engineering report.
I have no idea the answer to that one, Charlie. Can you give me a little more context what you're thinking about?
Slope.
Slope. So are you talking about like slope of a structure or slope of the land behind the structure, or the combination of both, failings in some respect?
I think first and foremost, probably the ocean shore. And you can look at the Oregon coast and look where people got swept off in tsunami events, small as they may be, and sneaker waves and otherwise. There's a significant difference in the safety of a beach based on its slope. And so I guess that was one thought. I mean, there's other upland things as well. But that was like one of my more initial thoughts.
And I guess I'm still struggling to understand how that might relate to engineering side of it. I mean, we know of situations where people have, lost their lives. For example, at a Glen Eden beach, walking along the beach there, where a rip embayment cut a vertical face in the beach face, and they slipped and fell in a storm and got swept off. 2 people died that way at Glen Eden Beach about 20 years ago. So it does happen, but I'm just struggling to understand how this relates to engineering.
Is it possible to engineer different structures or in different ways that would impact the slope of the beach differently, creating wave refraction, scour, and such that may increase the slope? Or is there engineering practices, particularly when we think about moving sand around and otherwise, that may not increase slope and accelerate opportunities for things like rip embayments to even occur?
Well, so there's a couple of things in there. One is that it depends a little bit on the basic geomorphic character of the beach itself. So, if we think about Glen Eden Beach is a mixed sand and gravel beach. It's because of its propensity of having higher concentrations of coarse sand into gravel size material. It's going to produce a steeper slope, and it's going to be much more responsive to storm wave conditions. And so that is, to me, that's one of the most dangerous beaches on the Oregon coast, is Glen Eden Beach, because of those combinations of very narrow wave breaking on the beach toe itself, on the beach face, and its steep nature produces really high run up at very high velocity. So a structure could be designed. I mean, structures are designed and have different types of responses on the beach itself. A vertical seawall is going to cause more scour in front of it, where the beach elevation would be lowered fairly significantly. Whereas a riprap structure, because it's more sloping and more permeable, it tends to produce less wave reflection and lower scour. And then, of course, other types of structures come into play, dynamic revetments, a little bit different again. Sandbags, very different. Probably sandbags are more like, beach walls. Yeah. So it just opens up a whole suite of different types of responses. I'm not sure I'm answering your question.
Well, I think it feels like you're reinforcing what I said, maybe that engineering practices can impact the slope of the beach, therefore public safety. I think we're also at Glen Eden Beach, there was sand mining that happened there a long time ago.
1970s. Yeah, 1970s.
Yeah. So that significantly impacted and changed that area as well. And from a goal 18 perspective, we might say uniquely impacted that area differently.
Yeah, it was a pretty nominal amount of sand mining because it got stopped pretty quickly. I don't think it has had a big part to play in the processes going on and responses in that particular beach area. The structures, the more extensive nature of the structures in Salishan are much more likely to cause long-term changes because of this cumulative effect business that we were talking about before.
Okay, Jackie, I saw your hand up. Did you want to comment about the public safety side of things?
Yeah, I think I was just gonna comment that it gets into a little bit of messy territory talking about slope stability because these structures aren't just thinking about riprap. That's not intended to stabilize like a 30-foot tall bluff. That gets into different type of engineering, but I might have been misunderstanding what Charlie was asking. So
okay. Well, it's definitely be something we'll follow up on, and I'll look into it a little bit more, Charlie. So thank you for bringing that up. Rhiannon.
Yeah, I just have a couple of examples that might speak to what Charlie's talking about. One, just thinking about the Peter Gero's safe beach hours research, and in terms of like having a large riprap structure that is creating an islanding effect during sneaker waves or king tides or high tides, and having safe access north and south that may be accessible during low tide but not during high tide. That could be considered a beach safety issue in considering the design standards and how far that structure would jut out. Another one, thinking of like if you're using large woody debris or something else or dynamic revetments that might move, how those might impact public safety over time as they do move. And yeah, I think those are the two main ones I think I was thinking of. Oh, the other one was just having like equipment on the beach to begin with. How you're designing things is going to impact what type of equipment you're using, how long it's going to be down there, how, what safety impacts that might have.
Great. All right. I want to try to run through this. I know there's going to be less comments probably on these last few, but I want to make sure we get through this, and I have at least a few minutes to talk about the fee, so I can have opportunity to adjust that for our next or one of our next meetings. But this section here, peer review, this is completely new, but it's based on a 1994 recommendation. And so basically we've kind of brought this out. First off, I want to say it's like it is not requiring it for every report, but we may. And I understand there's a little bit of ambiguity in that. That's where the matrix would come into play. But we want to reserve this right too, because there are and have been several times where we've gotten a report and it's like, whoa, this just it just doesn't look right. It doesn't what's being presented there just doesn't seem like it matches what's on the ground, whatever that is. And so having that spelled out a little more up front, and then again in the matrix being able to say like some of these projects really need to have this if the site meets certain conditions. But there's two kind of ways of doing that. The primary one would be to actually have the applicant go out and have the report peer reviewed. And then the other one would be for the department to be able to arrange for this. The B is actually consistent with what's in the I think it's the coastal erosion overlay model language, and I know some of the local jurisdictions have where geology reports they can send it out, have it peer reviewed, and assess a fee for that. And so, what this does by putting this in here will give us that ability. I can't see that initially it's going to be something that we're going to be, you know, broadly applying, but it will also help set us up that we can start creating potentially a program that has these looked at when needed, and something that can maybe even dovetail a little bit more consistently with some of the counties when we're looking at, there's a geology report put together for our project and for a county and for a city. And so that's really what this is trying to do, is get kind of build that in and set a framework up without setting it up as a separate process. And again, initially it will be limited pretty much to those where there's just big questions or very complicated nature to the projects, that we just need to have that extra set of eyes looked at it. So, Rhiannon.
Yeah, I just want to add real quick that Coos County just adopted their new Goal 18 updates, and they included a very similar provision to this. So I think it's a great idea.
Would you happen to share the language or be able to share that language with me, Rhiannon?
Yeah, I can find it. I'll email excuse me, I cannot talk to it. I will email it to you.
I think this is great too, Kevin. This is it sort of provides extra goad to sloppy geotechs who just want to write a bunch of boilerplate and get it passed through as the usual thing that everybody's used to. So it might just provide a little bit more incentive to get something substantive in there and raise the standard of these reports, which really sometimes is quite pathetic. So I think this is a great provision to have in there.
I agree. I know that in Washington, ecology has a staff geotech, and so anyone who is, well, anyone, I should say, any planner that has even, at the municipal level, can tap that expertise so that by the time it gets to the state ecology level, it's already, potentially been looked at, and had those questions answered. And then again, if at the ecology level they have questions, they that the municipality did not, they of course can still have that review. So I think this is really important, and I'm glad that I like B much more than A. I would just worry that A would be more difficult if you're asking a peer to review your work. So I think B is cleaner.
Yeah, and the thought would be it would be the applicant, or I'll say their consulting firm, whoever, if it's not the geology firm, it would be the geologist asking for peer review. It'd be basically the applicant saying, "Hey, I'm looking at this for my behalf too, to make sure that it meets these standards." And I think it's that a little bit of quality assurance, but again, it's that part of the issue is right now we are not set up to do those internal reviews. We can see as this goes forward if I'll say it looks like enough of them need it, and that is something that gets set up, and then that's something we can talk about as a state. But that's this just gets us to where we're able to do that, but it's not requiring it. So, all right, Charlie, you had a
Yeah, I like this too. I do question one, I think it's great, but how it happens in practice, I think, is the question. Some assurance, at least in what an applicant is being asked to do, is helpful. So I don't know what kind of a lift it is or an expense otherwise for surprise, we need a peer review now. But anytime the department may or may not require something, leaves some level of uncertainty for the applicant. So I do like having like an independent, interagency within Oregon body that's able to do peer review. or a sort of specified way that it happens. But I just want to call it, it does create a little bit of uncertainty. And the more certainty
Yeah.
we can get in that. And I would go back to, number 3, I thought about this as well, is like, well, unless otherwise specified by the department, a geological site report is required. So as somebody reviewing an application, how would I know how that was not required on the other end? So it seems like there's some explaining to do by the department in either of these cases. And I don't know how that fits into the rule, but both for those reviewing and those applying, really in 3 and 6, where it seems like there should be some level of understanding of how that happens or why that is happening.
Absolutely. And I think number 3 will definitely be in the matrix. I think this will as well to some extent. And we'll see how that kind of frames out. But that would be the intent, is that unless we got something that as we're looking at it and it's like, wow, this just blows our mind on, I'll just say, you say there's 20 feet of erosion annually and the line is wet, if the beach is west of where, or the bluff is west of where the SVL is, that's probably something we'd get in, and again, probably be an incomplete application. We'd send it back and say, we're going to need to have this peer reviewed because this just doesn't work. You've said it's had 20 foot of erosion for the last 50 years, and yet it looks like it's from everything else, it's moved west. Well, obviously I want to have some validation of where that came from. So kind of being able to have that probably through some of that incompleteness review as well. But other than that, it would be in that matrix of projects. All right. Let's see. Jonathan, you were.
I mean, I think this is important. I mean, this was recognized by Jim Good and others back in 1994, and it's one that has been, repeatedly a problem because of who pays for these costs. And in the best of all worlds, my agency would be potentially contracted to do something like this. Similar to Washington Department of Ecology. We would have an engineering geologist on board or a certified geologist in coastal processes who could actually do this type of review. That would be the best of all worlds, but the legislature doesn't provide that avenue, and we continue to have this problem. And so it's a reliance on independent reviewers. That could be a colleague of whoever's submitting the application. And so you still run problems, whether the review was done adequately enough and things like that. So ideally, it should be done independently by another agency in the best of all worlds. But, obviously that requires financial support and legislative support to instigate something like that.
Thank you. Rhiannon.
Yeah, I'm not seeing a chat option on here to drop the language in, but I can read it too if you'd like.
Sure.
Okay. From Coos County, it says technical review support. In the event of a dispute between professional engineering geologists regarding a submitted geologic hazard report, the county may request an additional independent review to determine compliance with these standards. The jurisdiction may retain a licensed certified engineering geologist to conduct this technical review, and the applicant shall be responsible for all associated costs. The findings of the independent review shall be incorporated into the final permit decision. And I put it in the Teams chat, Kevin, so you can see it later too.
Thank you so much. Okay, Diana. And then I want to move on to 7 if we can.
I'm just curious if anyone can give me an idea of what that would cost to do a review of a report.
I don't think out of anybody here, Jack, you'd be the only one that could probably even give some educated guess.
Well, I could provide a perspective as well.
Okay.
Go for it, Jackie.
Yeah, I mean, if it's just reviewing a report and marking up comments or providing some sort of letter response, I would guess on the order of like 2,000, you're assuming around 10 hours of engineering time or professional review time.
Yeah, and I would say, probably minimum 1,000 and up to several $1,000s, depending on the magnitude of the proposal and the type of work. I mean, it just depends.
Yeah.
But I think Jackie's description at the low end there is right on, but it could be more expensive than that.
And then, so how many applications does OPRD get in a year? I'm just curious of like, what would we be asking the legislature for? I mean, how much? It doesn't seem like it would be, a terribly large number.
Yeah, and I think part of the problem we're going to have, and I was noticing this when we get to the fees next, I can talk to you a little bit more about how many we get and kind of where that looks. But like I said, there's some question marks of what the budget will look like in the future versus what it is now, just because projects are going to change pots most likely. Um, so
Okay,
yeah, I don't know that we have an answer for that right now.
okay, thank you.
Well, I'll just offer another comment. I mean, so Washington Department of Ecology started off with one engineer and an assistant to collect basically beach profile change data, similar to what we do in Oregon. And I think it was about 10 years ago, the legislature decided to invest in assessing sea level rise impacts within the Puget Sound area and along the open coast, and they supplied general fund support to that program. That's how Washington Department of Ecology has expanded to the number of staff that they have today.
Yeah.
The Oregon legislature has put $0 into funding any form of coastal monitoring work that I do. All of the work that I do comes from funding from outside sources. That's the difference. And so, we tend to be more consulting, project orientated. It's a struggle to find funds to do basic observational type monitoring, which is fundamental to all these types of geotechnical type assessments. So someone
Yeah.
has to actually invest in these types of studies in order to provide the quality of information that you all are asking for.
Yep. Absolutely. And Diana, to kind of build on what Jonathan's saying as well, is if we just take broad numbers, let's just say we required this of all of our current shoreline protection, and we look at a high number of, say 40 in a biennium, and that's a high number of applications that come in. Even if we're looking at a couple thousand, each, you're not paying for a full-time position for a biennium out of that. We would have to inflate that even further if we were going to have the applicants cover the entire cost. And so you could be looking at just a minimum rate for any of those of, being at least 5 to 10,000 roughly, just very rough ballpark for any sort of internal review of those. So again, it's where does that supplemented from supplementation from the legislature, because obviously those positions aren't, they would have to be a full-time position, but you might not have full-time work either. So again, it wouldn't be necessarily fair to have the applicants pay for all of that time. So again, it's this chicken and egg piece, and so this is kind of a stopgap, but could allow us to move to that way. So
Are you not
okay.
allowed to have people on retainer?
We could, but then that takes staff time to manage the retainers and the contracts and manage all of that as well. And so again, it's this, at what point does it cost more or less? But again, we're trying to build that in to the process and see what that can actually be to give us that flexibility. And maybe that's what does happen is we have a retainer. So yeah, lots of questions to answer, and we're running out of time, so I need to jump through here. 7 and 8. These are two pretty simple ones. One is just putting a cap on 5 years for the reports, or if site conditions change, basically we can require an update or a new report. And that they're only valid for the proposed alteration, and that is coming from experience. We've had reports that have been brought back, a decade later saying we just want to use this, we'll dust it off and use it. It's like, doesn't represent what you're planning to do or what's there. And then the other one is we've seen to where a report's been used locally and then the project has changed, and then they submit the same report for our permit, and it's like it's a different application or a different project. And so making sure that we're just being clear that those reports are covering what's being asked for and the location. And given the dynamic nature, we put the 5-year on there. And then the last 8 is just clarifying that they're public record. And so that doesn't necessarily have to be put out there, but it's basically really also trying to tie it back in that if your neighbor comes in and we're looking at something, we can also reference back to a report that is there, that they are part of that body of knowledge. Jackie, go ahead.
For the note on report validity, I don't know if this was worth adding, but some sort of way for the engineered record or the CEG to assess that, because if the site conditions have changed dramatically in that 5 years, then they should be given the opportunity to reevaluate.
Well, and I think that would be the intent, is that they would, if that's what that second portion is supposed to be, is like if we, I just say they send in a report and we go out there and it's like, wow, the shoreline looks completely different than what you're showing me in the report, and what this will is that then we're kicking it back saying, no, you need to update that, because like you said, it's not going to represent what was evaluated and what the recommendations were based on. That was the intent behind that. Does that not get at what your question was?
I guess just giving the professional that's on the project the opportunity to weigh in as well, because they're the ones often that are liable.
Yeah. And how would you suggest us, bringing that in, like if it's over a certain amount of time, or if there's what sort of trigger? Because again, that's usually the applicant that we would be asking when they submit the application. So I'd want to communicate that back to them saying, hey, if the A, B, or C happen, you need to have something, a verification from your professional.
Yeah, I guess I just wonder because there are some cases where the applicant takes the geologic report and then the professional isn't contacted until towards the end of the project, because that's when we're called back in to provide the documentation. So just some sort of, like, before a permit is approved, the engineer can review the report that's submitted or evaluate upon application submittal that the report is still valid, or like some sort of signature. I don't know. Okay.
No, that's actually really good. I mean, we could build that into our application requirements because it's like the report's good for 5, but you still have to give get a thumbs up that it still is applicable. I like that idea. Okay, we'll look at adding something like that.
Yeah.
Okay. Diana.
I just wondered, would they be required to then go back and get a review at the local level?
So I guess I would defer that back to the local agencies, but we have seen where projects have changed through the local approval, and that's basically what's been approved, and then they come to us with something different. But again, their geology report and everything was based on what they had proposed originally. But then they submit us something, and I'll just say the recommendations are different than what they're proposing, and that's different than, which is maybe what they got approved locally. And so again, there's that disconnect between the report and what they're proposing. But yeah, if it's different, if they're proposing something different to us than they did that they got approved locally, then yeah, they should be going back locally and getting that adjusted too.
Right. So if you guys determine that, the conditions have changed considerably, then don't they go back to their local jurisdiction and get that review with what's happening now?
They should, yeah. And that, like I said, that's not always the case. There's just some weird nuances in there. But yes, the point would be is they'll have to go back. But that's where we would be then getting it under some of the other under pieces where you have to have local approval. And if we notice that they're submitting something to us that's not consistent, we will bring that up to them and be like, and usually copy the local jurisdiction and say, wait, we're not on the same pages here. So
okay.
John O'Leary.
Yeah, I think kind of to Jackie's comment. So we require, when we issue, or before we issue any permits, we'll get the geological hazard report. That'll be part of the application. I'll have a set of designs, and then I always have the applicant take their designs to the geologist or engineering geologist and have them write a letter that said, I've reviewed the proposed designs for this application. And then that letter comes in. It just kind of guarantees that before a permit's issued, that professional has reviewed the design, the engineer designs or whatever, architecture or whatever, and then that way we're issuing a specific permit with that letter that demonstrates that geologist or engineering geologist has actually looked at that proposed design. So, and we just do that every time. And then the geologists have an opportunity to say, well, this report was 3 years old and things change. And then usually I just don't hear back from the applicant for a couple of 6 months. So.
No, that's good. Appreciate that, John. Okay, well, I am going to do something really quick here, only because I really want to get your feedback. And I'm sorry if we run over just a hair. So just a quick reminder, we got the new rules or new statute for our fees, and I wanted to give you some context for what I sent you with the rules proposal. But basically, I went through and kind of looked at a budget I shared with you guys previously, which was around 1.2 million that we could tell currently our budget is. Our manager is working on trying to get a much cleaner version of that. But so we see it's somewhere between 1.2 and 1.7 per biennium, so every 2-year period. But I went through and kind of looked at what an ideal staffing would be. And this goes back to, I think, Charlie, you made a comment related to what do we need? And one of those is we need a dedicated ocean shore manager and, and our team being pretty solid. So I put that together as well as our Department of Justice costs. As we've been applying the rules as written, we are getting more pushback, as kind of can be expected, but that's also causing our program costs to increase. And so looking at those again from a very conceptual nature, it looks like the range is somewhere between 1.7 and 2.6 million. So our cost kind of the high on the current total and the low on the project is around that 1.7. I can say that's probably a pretty safe number for us to budget to. So for the purposes of this exercise, I went through and kind of said, well, what does that look like, right? And based on kind of the percentages that we were looking at for our time spent, went through and looked at our previous version I brought to you was like, well, let's have like a 1,000, a 3,000, I think it was $5,000 kind of application fee. But then as I looked through it, it actually cost us more to do the full application review. The total cost is still the same, but it was just kind of where we took those numbers and split them. So by running it through that model that I had kind of shared with you previously about the number of permits and kind of where they might fit in some of these levels, with that new kind of structure of a $1, $5, and $10,000 fee, it came out to 1.7 million, which is kind of where we would need to be. But what it does is I just wanted to share with you these kind of numbers that it lays out here of having these larger numbers. And I'm just not sure what this group's feedback is on, I'll say, gut check. And I just wanted to give you guys an opportunity because I've gone through and what you'll see in the rules is try to take those numbers and put them into a kind of similar tiering system to what DSL provided. You can provide me feedback on those concept rules and the breakdown by project types. But what I wanted to get out of you guys today is if there was anybody that had a little bit of a gut reaction to having some of these. Now, I will say the complex, in the past, we've had them over 100,000 on these fewer ones. The average projects are going to be, I think, depend on how I break it out in the new tiering, it's probably going to be between that 30 and 50,000 range. So that would be for hardened fully solid gray infrastructure. That's I think I have it under 100 feet, over 100 feet, and then pipelines and cable. Some of those bigger things are going to be that 30 to 50, but then it incrementally goes down as you have more nature-based solutions, as you have public access. And again, I don't have time to get into that, but I just wanted to get a gut check because this is the reality based on the comments I got before of try to cover the program's cost. Is there anybody going, wow, this is too much to ask of applicants? So that's kind of what I'm looking at, because if it is, then we need to figure out a different way to approach this. Any thoughts, just gut check wise?
So just so I understand it, Kevin, like for an average activity, average proposal, it's costing you around 30 grand to process that application.
And to do the monitoring, the permit modifications, tracking it down, bond releases, I mean, all that other stuff, yes, over the lifespan of those projects, that is what it came out to on some of those. And that also includes some of the compliance and monitoring work as well.
So in the monitoring is just in terms of, making sure that the geotech is operating within the specs as defined in the report and is not
and make sure the
encroaching out on
construction's being done. Yeah, construction's being done the
all
way
of
it's
that.
supposed to. It's getting built the way it is. Yep, all of that stuff. Yes.
Okay. So my initial reaction is, these are big numbers. Especially, the average and complex. I mean, those are substantial numbers.
They really are, and like I said, we probably need to refine those. I mean, and we did talk through some of these previously, but yet it was taking an initial kind of when we did the legislative piece and looking at kind of how many hours we take. But this also includes we have like our beach rangers doing day-to-day inspections. So you start building in those staff positions, and even though they're not getting charged full time to our program, it adds up. And I think part of it's the low number of projects we have and how intensive it is to keep an eye on them, especially when you think some of these projects are going on for 3 to 9 months on the beach. I mean, that's part of it too, is that there's a lot more looking at them.
I guess is it justifiable to include the beach rangers since that's again, correct me if I'm wrong, but I mean they have a very specific role, a different type of role.
Yeah. They do, and they are doing kind of the basic inspections on them, and they're posting the sites for the public review. So those are the hours we included. We didn't include that like their whole salary.
So my final comment, because I know Charlie wants to get in on this, but in terms of complex, I mean, I guess I'm thinking, are we talking about cable landings?
Yeah, and I do have. This is probably a little better. I don't want to get into how this is broken down, but yeah, you'd be looking at like these larger projects would be structural over 100 foot versus a new cable landing. Those are the two big ones that would come in, right? And then you have the under 100 foot would be, so again, it's trying to kind of come up with a way, and this goes into that tiering that's explained when you guys look at stuff. But
right, and so the greater than 100 foot really, correct me if I'm wrong, those could be multiple applications all going in together.
That'll be stuff we'll have to dialogue when we go through this tiering.
Okay.
And specify that. But my bigger question for right now is if the gut reaction from this group is these numbers are too big to ask for people, then we need to have a different discussion, and that I can take back to my management and say, okay, we're going, because like I said, the direction I got before was cover all the program costs. That's what I'm bringing here. So
I think 50 grand to charge a cable company is nominal in the scheme of things, and I think you should charge that. But for some of the other applications, it may not fly.
And this would just be for the application. This wouldn't include mitigation, just compensation, or any of those fees. So this is just the application and permit fee.
Cool.
So, Charlie, go ahead. And I know we're over on time. If you guys have something, please stick around. If not, you can send me a comment. Charlie, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm not the best person to comment on the cost. I am pretty good at saying there's not enough information in front of me right now to give you any kind of feedback on that, even though I would probably support pretty high costs all around because I'm not the applicant in most cases. I'm thinking about this from the cost of the agency and my other expectations of the agencies, which is maybe to the previous point that our beach rangers aren't sufficiently funded and that our ocean shore team isn't sufficiently funded with capacity. And that's something that my organization's worked at it for a long time. So we've gotten a lot better in that place. Whether or not this is the place to recoup those costs means I need to have a lot more information, I think. And that second page started to get there, but
Yeah.
still better understanding like how this applies to cost to the agencies, and then also
Mhm.
why that is the expectation of the applicant. I
Mhm.
think anytime I've ever tried to create any policy around money, um, more information is better than
Yeah.
less.
Well, and
Um,
what I'm looking from this group is I want to target in, and then I can create the messaging behind that. But like I said, I just kind of wanted to throw it out there and be like, this gets at what the Scott dialogue was at our last meeting of try to recover all the costs. So
I support recovering your costs. Um, understanding, and this is, I trust you, but not everybody trusts you in the
oh,
agency, and so that it's a matter of unpacking that, I think.
and I'm gonna have to unpack this a whole lot more. Like I said,
Yeah.
that's why I'm trying to work with rough numbers right now to see proof of concept. So
It looks like
yeah,
Diana has her hand up.
yeah, Diana, go ahead.
I also support you guys being paid for the work that we're asking you to do. And I'm not shocked at all by these numbers. And I know I work in Cannon Beach, which is, a wealthy part of our coast. But I have been told multiple times by oceanfront homeowners how cheap it is to go through this process compared to their experiences elsewhere, being that most of them do own homes elsewhere. And during the Dune stopping view grading, I remember one coalition of homeowners suggested that they give $10,000 to the city each time there was grading for the city to do whatever they wanted. And after it, I had mentioned to them that I thought that was pretty low and kind of exemplified their the lack of value that they put on the ocean shore. And they said, oh, well, that was just our starting. We planned to end up around 50. So that was on top of all of this. That was just something that they were going to throw into a pot for the city to, get what they wanted. So I know that my experience is in, a little bubble, but time and again, when people decide to appeal and all those things, they talk about how cheap it is locally. And I know that to engage an attorney, which they often do for one hearing, is between 20 and 50,000. And sometimes there are 4 hearings at the local level. So, these people feel strongly about wanting to do this work and apparently are very comfortable paying for it. And I don't think that it is the state's job to make oceanfront home owning less expensive. We need to, you are tasked with protecting this. So recouping your fees is, extremely a reasonable ask. And I hope that you're not scared of that.
All right. Anybody have any heartburn about it? I guess. I mean, I'm glad to hear, and that's the message we got the last meeting. So like I said, I just want to kind of make sure, Jackie, if you're still on, working on the consulting side of it, do these fees, do they cause you to choke at all? Is there, it's trying to figure out how to meet multiple things and be fair.
Yeah, it's a hard question to answer. Um, yeah, they feel high to me, but as it's been echoed throughout this, it's uh, that's what might be what we have to do to maintain. Uh, yeah, it's important to keep the shoreline. I don't know how to word this. I think it's important work that y'all are doing, and that should be reflected in the fees. So if that scares away some owners, then so be it.
Yeah, and what I was trying to do when we get to the hearing again, we'll talk about our next meeting though, is if you notice this kind of gradation from non-structural nature-based solutions up to large structural. And it's again that kind of little bit of that carrot and stick, right? Of this the state, the preference of the state is these non-structural, giving some opportunities for there to be things that people could afford, but also because there's less long-term infrastructure there, it's also to cost us less over time. So Charlie, do you have one final comment? Then I know we're 10 minutes over. Thank you guys for sticking around and giving me that general feedback. But
Yeah, just a quick comment that might be helpful, I think, for a lot of people to evaluate these things is some comparison. And I know that where programmatic approach is very different than other states, but getting an idea on a cost basis and a capacity basis, how this may differ from, I would say, both our neighbors to the north and the south.
Yeah.
I think one we aim to be closer to, and the other we aim to be a lot further away from. And I think that that's another place to kind of help in at least explaining, unpacking the commissions and the public comment period kind of stuff when we get to that point.
Yeah. And I don't know if you were on the original discussion, Charlie, but I did bring in California, and I looked at DSL, and I think one of but California, the Coastal Commission for doing it could have been, I mean, it ranged, but it was in tens of thousands once you finally got your permit. And so we're probably lower than them in general, but yeah, we can always talk about that again at our next meeting. I can bring those back up. So, okay. Well, thank you all. Please, as normal, these documents are up. Send any comments, any thoughts on them. I will be starting to work on those here over the next probably month or two as I clean up these other sections. And we'll see you guys in about a month. Thank you all for staying around a little bit longer.
Thanks, Kevin.
Thank you.
Thank you.